All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money. Excited to be with you. Coming live to you from Paris. So I am on my last leg of my trip before I head back home tomorrow. How you doing, Elizabeth?
I am doing great. We are going to be very excited to have you home. I know Paris
Uh,
is very,
yeah,
very wonderful and exciting.
yeah, yeah. A
We'll
lot, a
definitely.
lot of members of the community has been asking when I'm coming back. So I'll be home tomorrow.
Yes, and that leads me to something kind of exciting. We're going to have 4 shows this week. We have a wonderful sponsor, OPWEF Explorations, that has sponsored all 4 shows this week.
Yeah,
So you guys are going to be seeing a lot of our faces.
yeah. For
Yes.
4 days. So you'll see me tomorrow again as soon as I land. I'm gonna just take a 1 hour break and we'll get on to another
Yep. I'll
mission.
pick you up from the airport, and then we're going to go
Yeah,
straight to the
yeah,
studio.
yeah. But on a serious note, guys, there is a lot of stuff going on. So
Yeah.
as you know, I know I didn't get a chance because I'm moving around different parts. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about what's going on. But in these 4 episodes we're gonna be doing today, one is tomorrow, then Wednesday and Thursday. So
Yep.
we'll be addressing really the key issues that we want you to know. So
Well, and like you,
today,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, like you said, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And
of
during
course,
the next few days, we have
yeah.
the G7 summit.
Seven. Yeah, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today because you have to understand the big picture, as we always say. So, G7 coming in a time of a really a major turmoil on the global stage. And what am I referring to? We're not talking just about tariffs. We're talking about what's going on right now between Israel and Iran. You know, a major seismic shift that is going to reshape the global order, in my opinion, let alone impacting the economic landscape. And that's how I see it playing forward. So
Go
uh,
ahead, David.
yeah,
This is really your area of expertise, and I think that the most important thing about what's happening with G7 right now is
yeah,
the fact that there are some very big economics at the center of what they're talking about.
yeah.
So we're talking about rare earth
Mm-hmm.
minerals, which has been something we've been talking about on the show, honestly, probably for about a year, maybe longer. And we're talking about the tariffs, and we're talking about global trade, and we are, of course, talking about what is happening between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, yeah. And to tie to that one is the energy, because
Yes.
remember, Iran is a major oil producer. Iran also has a major influence and impact, and I feel comfortable using this term regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Why is this? Is because 1/4 of the global oil shipment of oil goes through that Strait of Hormuz. So you can just imagine what might lie ahead moving forward, given now the tensions rising between Israel and and Iran. So now there is one thing that I need you guys to know, and that one is where, or it's not to know, but rather the question we need to ask is where this is going to lead to on both sides of the track. One
Absolutely.
is the military aspects with Israel and Iran, and the other one on the economic front. The one thing that I wanted to highlight to you briefly here is that the idea of what's going to be happening later on regarding the Israeli Iran conflict will be determined, in my opinion, within about 2 weeks. That's the way I see it. Within 2 weeks, we're going to know whether it will be some sort of peace talks behind closed doors through a third party, whether it will be some agreement on ceasefire, or it will be some ratchet intentions, including major powers involvements into that.
So it's it's very hard to separate what's happening with Iran and Israel right now with the
Yeah.
G7, because it's really it's an absolutely game changing deal.
Mhm.
So let's go to our sponsor first, and then
Sure.
we're going to dive into both things, because you can't separate the two. But the G7 is also dealing with some really important issues that I think are going to sort of change the way that fundamentally global trade is being done, what global trade is going to happen. And then also there's a huge component of artificial intelligence that is being addressed at the G7. And artificial intelligence is kind of the new space race. It's kind of the new big trade race. So let's go to a word from our sponsor. Thank you again to our wonderful sponsor. And then we'll get right into it.
That brings me to today's show sponsor, OPWEF Explorations, Inc. A big thank you to our sponsors, because without them, the show wouldn't be possible. The demand for new high-grade gold discoveries is surging, and that's where I want to talk about a company called OPWEF Explorations, Inc. They trade on the US stock market. The ticker symbol is OPWEF on the screen below. They could be well positioned to capitalize on this trend, offering investors exposures to potential upside in the heart of Quebec's prolific mining country. Introducing OPWEF Explorations, Inc. They have their flagship gold exploration project in Quebec's world-renowned Abitibi Gold Belt, and are purely focused on achieving their next major goal, making the next significant gold discovery in one of the world's richest mining regions. Quebec's Abitibi Gold Belt, the premier mining district. Quebec is consistently ranked as one of the world's top mining jurisdictions, renowned for its strategic location for trade with the US, stable regulations, infrastructure, and rich mineral endowment. The Abitibi Gold Belt alone has produced over 190 million ounces of gold from 120 mines. OPWEF's properties are strategically located near these giants, with one of the largest producing gold mines right next door to their Arrowhead property. Check out OPWEF Explorations using the link below. Remember, there are always risks in investment and there are no guarantees of any kind. Please always do your own research. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Very, very interesting. Very interesting timing also as to when the company reached out to us for this.
Yeah.
And here is why. Here is why. In conjunction with the G7 is because one of the things going to be on the agenda is the financial aspect and how to deal with the decline of the dollar. I am here in Europe right now.
Yeah.
I can tell you the strength of the euro in comparison to the dollar, which I never expected. So, and I am seeing it right here that the dollar is far less than what anybody has anticipated. And that tells me where things are headed. And this is why it is my belief, and again, this is just my opinion, it is my belief that many are thinking, when I say many, I'm referring to investors, I'm referring also to countries, thinking in terms, we better stock up on gold before things go very, very south.
Well, okay, so interesting. This is a side note, but it's also not. So there's been an interesting theory that sort of resurfaced, and it's called Triffin's paradox. And that basically is that for a country to continue to be, so for a country basically to be a reserve currency, which the United States is, it has to run massive trade deficits. The problem with that, though, is that to run massive trade deficits doesn't serve a country long term. So maybe we'll do a whole show on Triffin's paradox, but the Mises Institute is who sort of started pushing this idea back, basically, that for a reserve currency, the way that a country keeps a reserve currency doesn't actually work in the long run. And so devaluing the dollar is what needs to happen for the United States to be competitive again, because the dollar has been artificially inflated because it's been the reserve currency. So I don't know, there's something very interesting going on with the dollar being devalued. It's not as simple as like, oh no, the dollar is collapsing, it's being devalued. Trump has been talking about devaluing the dollar for a while, and using that actually as a strategy to make the United States more competitive again. Because quite frankly, part of the reason that that the US is not a manufacturing hub is to manufacture anything here in the United States. Like, let's say you're manufacturing, I have a spoon right here. Okay. Oh, you can't see it, but let's say you're manufacturing this spoon. This spoon could be manufactured in countries that have a currency that is devalued or less valuable than the US dollar. And if this spoon, so let's say the spoon cost, I don't know, $5 here in the United States, right? So you have a $5 spoon here in the US. Well, you're not going to go export that $5 spoon to Vietnam. They're not going to buy your $5 spoon, right? They're going to buy something from another Asian country, usually China, that is much cheaper. So this is something I'm very interested in. I'm very curious, but the devaluation of the dollar seems to be on purpose right now. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it is something that they're doing. So that's just a side note, but it's it's an interesting side note. So if you guys are more interested, it's Triffin's paradox. And it's something that I think is very interesting. Okay, but back to G7. G7, back to Israel and Iran, because the world is in absolute chaos right now, in between the Trump tariffs, in between the Middle East. We're looking at really a hot lot of stuff going on right now.
Well, one of the key things is that now what Israel is hoping for is that the U.S. will intervene on its behalf, because it is, so far I've been following briefly here. I didn't delve deeper yet till I get back home, because the environment here is not conducive for doing the research that I need. Is that the Israelis are now worried. They're worried because when Tel Aviv was hit, usually when you hear a capital, that's as we say, the optics of it on the global stage. The fact that Iran launched so many marches, to my knowledge, they launched about 500. However, not all of them made it to their targets. 20 of them, to my knowledge, made it. But that was enough to create now massive panic inside Israel. As a matter of fact, I found out that some Israelis now are leaving Tel Aviv, going to Australia. Believe it or not, they never ended over there.
It's safer for them. I'm glad that they're doing that. It's safer for them overall.
Yeah. The other thing is, we can't look at it only from that aspect. We have to look at it also from the aspect of how the attacks of Israel on Iran expose the weakness of Iran. Here is the thing. In addition to targeting the four C, what they call them, the 4C, the command, control, it's the other one is computing, has to do with technology aspects of it. The fact that Israel was able to do this, in addition to was able to take out three or four, don't quote me on this, but there were more than 2 individuals, high-ranking individuals. One of them was Bakari. Bakari was the head of the armed, so the equivalency for us for the Joint Chief of Staff. The other one was a nuclear scientist. Now, here is the question for you guys that I need you to understand. Not just the fact that Israel has the intelligence about where those guys are about. It tells you that there is a massive hole, a mole, I should say, inside the intelligence services in Israel.
Yeah.
That exposes the weakness. On the other hand, this now put forth one key question. And the key question is that only a few months ago, Iran turned down a military ventures with Russia.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. So all this, guys, you need to put it within the context. That does not mean, and again, this is my opinion, it does not mean that both Russia and China will not support Iran. They will.
Yeah.
It's just in their own way, because to them, meaning to Iran and to Russia and China, it's now or never. It's because you saw what took place, or what's still taking place in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I am sure Taiwan is watching what's going on.
I hope they are.
Yeah, I know. That was my point. But for the Russia and China, it's much more of a strategic aspect than anything else. Because a weak Iran in the Middle East is not good for Russia and China. And given where the dynamics, the geopolitical landscape now that is shifting in front of our eyes, not only in the Middle East or West Asia, but rather around the world, it gives you an idea now. For the US, it's going to become one of these. Should we get involved? Should not we get involved?
Mm-hmm.
And I read yesterday something on Twitter or X. It was a massive exposure of a heated debate as to someone who was asking, why should we fight on behalf of Israel? Why should we send our soldiers on behalf of Israel? They picked the fight, so they should finish it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I know, Elizabeth, Israel will not be in a position to do it by itself.
Absolutely. But it is a really big, so it's kind of interesting because I don't want to go too far into this conflict because I think one of our shows later this week is probably going to be all about this.
Yeah.
But I think that it's interesting. And I don't know, it's hard on YouTube because if you say too much and they don't like it, then they shut your stuff down. So, just sort of basically talking about it. I mean, I think it's very common knowledge that Israel would not be able to do this without the support of the United States. However, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to watch just how much support that ends up being. Because right now we're here in the United States, we're facing another raising of the debt ceiling. The big, beautiful bill got absolutely obliterated. So for those of you who don't know, the big, beautiful bill is one that Donald Trump and the Republicans were trying to push forward. The problem is that it increased spending by many trillions of dollars over the next few years. It had a whole bunch of stuff in it that the American people just absolutely did not like. So it would be interesting to see, as the United States is struggling to the extent that it is, especially with tariffs, people are overall not very happy with Donald Trump. His ratings are plummeting, understandably, because this has thrown an enormous amount of chaos. And if it is done on purpose to bring wealth back to the United States, it hasn't yet done that. So people are very unhappy with him sort of overall. So I'm curious to see if the United States even really can, because if Donald Trump were to bring the country into a greater conflict, it was interesting because, before Afghanistan, before the war on terror, before Iraq, before the US, went after the weapons of mass destruction, right? There had to be, some big crazy thing that happened that got the United States, got the people on board with doing that. Right now, they haven't done that, and I don't think they're going to. So I hope they don't.
I'm glad you mentioned Donald Trump, because this brings me to the point that where Donald Trump has not threatened Iran with a massive retaliatory if U.S. Locations or interests or bases or troops, for that matter, are attacked in Middle East or West Asia. And why is this important? It is important because Iran, through its foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, did mention that the Arab countries that would be supporting Israel will be a target.
Yeah. So do you want me to read what Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social? So this was yesterday. So Donald Trump wrote, Iran and Israel should make a deal and will make a deal. So it's interesting sort of listening to this. Everything's a deal. You get a deal. You get a deal. You get a deal.
But he doesn't get any deal after all.
Iran and Israel should make a deal and will make a deal, just like I got India and Pakistan to make. In that case, by using trade with the United States to bring reason, cohesion, and sanity. I'm very, very curious what he means about this. And I swear, guys, we're going to get to the G7 in a second, but this is a really important thing that's happening right now. Okay. In that case, by using trade with the United States to bring reason, cohesion, and sanity into talks with two excellent leaders who were able to quickly make a decision and stop. Also, during my first term, Serbia and Kosovo were going at it hot and heavy, as they have for many decades. And this longtime conflict was ready to break out into war. I stopped it. Biden has hurt the longer term prospects with some very stupid decisions, but I will fix it again. Another case is Egypt and Ethiopia and their fight over a massive dam that is having an effect on the magnificent Nile River. There is peace, at least for now, because of my intervention, and it will stay that way. Likewise, we will have peace soon between Israel and Iran. Many calls for meetings now taking place. I do a lot and never get credit for anything, but that's okay. The people understand. Make the Middle East great again.
It's my opinion, the guy is just lying. That's all I can say about that. Because it became clear, the hypes, the hyperbole of these statements is for domestic consumption, no more, no less. And by the way, guys, just FYI, when he was referring, according to the quote that Elizabeth just read to us here, the two leaders, the reference to the Israelis and India, right? Because there is a secret meeting taking place as we speak in Cyprus. Now, you have in Greece, in Greece, the Israeli Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister Modi are meeting in Greece. Now, here is where the tricky part is. Greece is a signatory to the ICC. The ICC has issued the arrest warrant for Netanyahu. So why is Greece not abiding by the law of the ICC? It tells you right there, because we do have massive influence over Greece, because we're supporting Greece against the Turks regarding the island, the Aegean, and that is where that, I just want you to know. Regarding India, India's playing both sides, as we all know. That's nothing new there. But this highlights to you the complexity of this kind of dynamics of what's going on. This is what I'm saying. Personally, I'm giving it 2 weeks. And as soon as I come back, guys, I will do more depth analysis and all that because of the research I'm going to be conducting regarding this. But I'm giving it 2 weeks because 2 weeks to me will highlight where this conflict is going to go. Despite how we see it right now and all that, Iran is not a small country.
No, it's not. And it's big on the global stage.
That's true. The second key aspect to all this, Elizabeth, has to do with how the Arab countries gonna position themselves now. Will be there countries that will allow their airspace to be used? Like, for example, and I found out that Iraq had no control over its airspace. The Israeli planes won over its own airspace, which is a violation of its sovereignty. Jordan is doing what it's doing. We don't even know what the Saudis are doing behind closed doors. We don't know what Bahrain is doing. Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, all of those monarchies, all of those countries, their key aspect is survival of the regime. They care less for whatever is going on. But Israel has to understand that now it opened the gate to many fronts on it, because now the Houthis have promised to retaliate against the Israelis by launching their missiles that they have in their possession. So will we see Hezbollah also acting? Will we see the militias in Iraq acting? Maybe, maybe not. But so far, it gives you an idea that Israel maybe took sort of more than it can handle. And the U.S., if the U.S. gets involved, the what's the word I'm looking for Donald Trump will always be remembered forever, the president that started the war with Iran.
And that's not a good look. I mean, I don't, the thing is, he's not looking to get reelected. I mean, I know we got this weird king stuff going on.
No, that's just hypes.
He's not looking to get reelected. So he can do a lot of things that are quite frankly unpopular, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. And the way that, unfortunately, we don't, since we don't actually have multiple parties. I mean, we have two parties that think that they're very different, but they're,
the same.
some behind the scenes things that allow them to work together. And they certainly are together on certain topics, this being one of them. But he can not more or less do whatever he wants, but he can do some things that are very unpopular. And so he is doing some things that are unpopular. But I do think it's interesting that he's sort of looking for a win there, because one of the big things that China was doing while Biden was president, actually, was China was negotiating peace between countries in ways that the world actually had not seen, because the U.S. had not been that type of negotiating power until then. So it's interesting. It seems almost actually in this Truth Social post that he's sort of calling back to that. Like, the United States actually is the world's negotiator. It's not China, it's the United States. So it's interesting. I'm curious to see what he's able to pull off. But I mean, I don't know. Israel seems to be pulling some strings all on its own, in a way that, that Ukraine was not doing, but that Ukraine, while it was very unpopular, was still continuing right now. We have to ask ourselves why. So switching to the G7 for a moment, because the G7 is sort of the big thing that's happening right now, because there's the G7 countries that are involved. It's interesting, actually. Trump, and I will share this, I'll share a clip of it actually in a minute, but Trump actually said that Russia should not have been kicked out of the G8, that Russia actually should have been kept because it is a big part. Everyone was talking about Russia, but Russia wasn't allowed to come to the table. In fact, they kicked Russia out of the table. So do you guys want to listen to that? Because I think it's interesting. Let me share this tab. All right. Can you guys see it? You probably cannot.
No, not yet.
You can't see it. Let me add it. Okay. So let's play a little bit.
Back to the G7, sir.
I'd love to have him back. I think it was a mistake to throw him out. Look, it's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8. And I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back. Obama and a couple of other people made a mistake and they got Russia out. It's very possible that if that was the G8, you wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. And if I was president, you definitely wouldn't have had the problem with Ukraine. Russia would have never attacked Ukraine. But you ask a very good question. The G8, it used to be the G8, and then these people threw them out. And I was arguing with Trudeau and with numerous of the people. Actually, Prime Minister Abe, a great man from Japan, agreed with me 100%, and some of the others did too. But I got there, it was the G7, as you know. They had already been terminated. I think it would have been very helpful, and it still would be helpful to have Russia be a part of that mix.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing that's going on right now.
Well, it's also because he's realizing that whatever he was promising regarding to end the conflict in Ukraine turns out to be beyond his capabilities and his abilities. So, in other words, he was just bluffing as far as his ability to really end conflict within 24 hours with a phone call. Only to realize I found out the complexity of it. Now, this is different when it comes down to how G7 will be now perceiving Donald Trump in that mix, because in Europe, right here, and I've talked to some, the idea that these tariffs on Europeans, they are not content about it. I asked one merchant one time. I was in a central market. They have, by the way, the food, guys, is incredible here in Europe. I'll admit it.
I miss it.
I'll give them credit. I had too many pastries, but they were incredible. So you live a little bit. So anyway,
you gotta live.
No, well, too bad I can't bring some with me. So.
Oh, I know, that'd be so great.
Yeah. So when I asked him, I mentioned to him about the tariffs, he was kind of like perplexed as to, almost like the idea of how can you expect this from a so-called ally? So, and this is why that G7 now meeting, it will be very interesting And once again, like I always say, to know the importance of a summit like that, read the final communique.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
is,
And
I've learned over the years that
Mhm.
is one of the things I look into prior to doing any analysis or saying anything. Till I
Yeah.
read that final communique, it gives me an idea. And also watch who is signing for it and who is not.
Yeah.
And that shows that.
Well, so this one I think is particularly interesting because there's what's going on in the G7, and then there's the other leaders that are coming to the G7 that are
Yeah.
not in the G7. So
Yeah.
we have Mexican president, we have Zelensky is also
Uh-huh.
going to be there.
Right.
And then a couple of other countries, I think South Africa has been invited. Let me see if I can get the whole list of the people who have been invited to the
Yeah.
G7 who are not in the G7.
Yeah.
I'll pull it up
Yeah.
and
And
show
you know why? And you know why, for example, Mexico and South Africa were invited? To me, for two reasons. One is because of what China is intending to do in Mexico regarding joint ventures for the EV production, the electric vehicle batteries production. For South Africa, is the concern that now the US is losing its bet regarding Africa, is losing that to the Russians and to the Chinese.
Right,
So
right.
it's almost like you start to say to yourself, finally, is diplomacy taking place? But it's too late. It's too late.
Well, so the US is in an interesting place, and I think this is one of my big issues across the board is that
Yeah.
the people that you're talking to in Europe, people here in the United
Yeah.
States, people across the globe don't actually know very much about global economics.
Yeah.
But global economics is actually what shapes everything in their life. So like I said, I think I'm going to do a show, or at least part of a show, on Triffin's paradox, because it's really important to understand why Donald Trump is going after these tariffs the way that he is. I do
Yeah.
not agree with it. Like, please hear, I do not agree with it, but it's important to understand at least what he's thinking, or what he may be thinking, and
Yeah.
what may actually be going on, regardless of whatever your emotions about it are, because it's making things very hard for people. When I was in Europe, I was in Europe last month, and I had people literally coming up to me. I was in Italy, and I had, people coming up to me and basically saying, these tariffs are really messing with things. They're really hurting people. And I said, first of all, I'm sorry. It's not if I could choose to do things, I would have done things differently. But unfortunately, Donald Trump doesn't listen to me or know that I exist. So I have absolutely no control over that. But the tariffs really are hurting people. But there is fundamentally an issue here in the United States where we have a trade deficit, where nobody wants to buy our securities. And so the United States is less and less able to meet its obligations because of that. Now, the United States is at fault for that. There's nobody else in the world that's at fault for it. It is the United States. But I do want to put out there that it's more nuanced than just tariffs and orange man bad. That may be the final say, but it's not the full picture, because the United States is in a really severe decline. So I really want to make that very clear. A couple of the other things that are happening at the G7. So let me share this with you guys. It is very interesting because this is what we're talking about, right? Oh, so who else is coming? European Union, Ukraine, Mexico, South Africa, India, and Australia were also invited to the G7. So Zelensky has a side meeting with Donald Trump. Mexico has a side meeting with Donald Trump, and Ukraine, there's a couple of issues that they're talking about. Obviously, the conflict, rare earths, all of that. And then Mexico is also talking about trade. So they're going to be discussing trade. So I'm very interested to see what happens out of this. But let me share this with you guys. And this comes from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It was a sort of like a panel. And this is from Naveen Giri Shankar, I hope I pronounced that correctly, president of CSIS, Economic Security and Technology Development. So let me see where this is. Sorry guys, it's like really long. Okay, so we're looking at supply chain, which is very interesting. So we're looking at supply chain. We're looking at convergence of critical minerals. Critical minerals have been, critical and rare earth minerals have been a really big part of the conversation of global trade in the last, I don't know, for a while, last year or so, but they've become particularly hot as Donald Trump has gone after China, because China is not only responsible for the mining of those rare earths, but also for the processing of them. Rare earth minerals are very dirty to process. And so China has the processing capability, and they also have the laws that allow for that processing, whereas other countries don't necessarily have that yet. And to build the infrastructure to process rare earths, because it's not like you dig in the ground and here's some copper or lithium, and then it's in a chunk and it's a nice chunk and that turns into a microchip, right? You have to process the rare earth minerals. So that's been a really big part of that. And especially China. So he's talking here about China's dominance. And I think that is sort of the big thing, right? It's like the G7 versus BRICS, right? It's like the G7, it's funny because when people talk about the G7, they're like, well, it's half of global GDP. Well, okay, but so is BRICS, right? Because they have the two major economies, each is in one of them. So that's important, but it's not like, there's another set of countries that have the other half of the of the global GDP. So anyways, I also want to talk about this AI, quantum, and chips. So AI, quantum, and chips. So there's another part of it where they're talking about where in the G7 they're talking about basically messing in other countries like governments and stuff, which I think is overall important, but I don't think anyone's going to stop doing that. No matter how much they talk about it, I don't think they're going to stop doing that. But I want to talk about artificial intelligence. So there's a show that I think we're going to do tomorrow or Wednesday, David. You tell me which day you want to do it. So China just started building their first giant supercomputer network in space.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, that's big. And so I think AI is sort of the next big thing. What do you think about it?
Oh, that will be certainly, it will be transformational because it's going to change the dynamics regarding space. And given that Russia and China have agreed to build a research lab on the surface of the moon, and I think they're going to invite some other countries, it tells me where things are headed. This is no different than what we had back in the early 60s when the Russians launched the Sputnik and the US rushed into after that because it was the so-called space race and all that. But you and I know that it wasn't about space race because what was at the heart of it was geopolitics. That's what was at the heart of it. So I see the same thing repeating itself, given the saying that goes, history repeats itself. Hopefully we learn something from it, but we tend to shoot ourselves in the foot with the failed policies that we have embarked on, and we are seeing the results. So this is why I'm like, it'd be interesting to see the final communique of this G7.
To see what happens on the sidelines.
Yeah, and I'm also curious to see whether it will be a sideline meeting between Canada and the US.
Yes, I think that's happening this morning. There's a conversation happening between Canada and the US this morning. We don't yet know what has come out of that meeting, but the US is sandwiched between Mexico and Canada. And so it is. Am I freezing for you guys? Is it just me?
Bit, not all the time. Not all the time. Slightly now.
Sorry guys, that must be my internet.
Okay.
That's very weird.
Okay. That means we come into the end of the show, basically.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, there I am. There I am.
Yeah. Well, that's why we are very grateful for the sponsor here to get this opportunity to address this really key hot topics. And we're going to be doing this, like we mentioned at the beginning, guys. We're going to be doing this tomorrow. I'm going to be landing around, I think, 14:30, somewhere around that time.
Yeah.
Then we'll do that. I don't care whether I'm tired or not. That's beside the point. And we'll do Wednesday and Thursday. And we're going to pick up the topics that will make more sense to you as we tie everything to the both what's taking place on the economic front and of course the military and the geopolitical aspects of it.
Okay, we have a super sticker from Ronald Spastic Polywog Shaw.
Oh, thank you very much for your kind support. Yeah.
Ronald says, I don't understand why China would ever agree to sell rare earth minerals to the US or a US ally, knowing they are next in line for destruction and conquest.
Yeah. Well, actually, for something, if I may answer this quickly here, there is one always, you don't think in terms of emotions when it comes down to geopolitics. And here is one thing why. Because China understands by at least giving something in as minor as allowing the sale of these chips to the rare earth rather on a smaller scale, because China holds the market, the big market share for that one. So to them is, yeah, we give something to the Americans because we're going to get something far better. And sometimes in the world of geopolitics, you have to think in these terms, because given how the Chinese culture is, they don't tend to operate like we do in the West by holding grudges and all that stuff. They don't have that kind of mindset. They think differently. So that's the reason why. And yes, there are those who are saying, why should even the Chinese be talking to the Americans? Well, but that's not how it works in the global geopolitics.
So also, I mean, okay, so I think we can all agree that the United States has been the United States and the United States through the IMF, through other organizations.
The World Bank.
Yes, exactly. I think we can all agree that the United States may have been the baddie, may have been the bad guy in a lot of these contexts.
Well, however, it has been. It has been.
Yes, for sure. That is unarguably true. However, the United States and China have had a very interesting history, and China has more or less built itself up on doing exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
China became processing for rare earths, processing rare earth minerals was really toxic and really bad. And the United States didn't want to do it. And so China said, we'll do it. But China more or less built itself on the US's dollar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, for China, it's what allowed China to raise itself up is because the United States has been the largest economy since World War II, basically, right? I think before that, but at least since World War II, the United States kind of came out of that as the emerging super or the superpower, right? And it's what we're watching in decline right now. But China took advantage in a smart way of the United States, and the United States is who basically outsourced all of our manufacturing basically over there. So this isn't a like China doesn't need the United States and never did. That's just flat out not true. China used the United States to get to where it's at. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Please hear that, because China took care of itself. But that was a mutually beneficial in a sense, because in a sense, it also was not beneficial for either country. But the United States and China have had a very long history. This isn't a just right now, because if the US isn't going to buy their rare earth minerals, like I said before, there isn't another economy like the United States. You're not Vietnam, although I'm sure it is a lovely place. I've seen pictures and videos. It looks fantastic. Vietnam is not the same economy that the United States is. And so you can't replace the United States with the global South. It is a nice secondary to the United States, but you can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can't just throw out the United States economy. And so there's a lot of people I've heard say, oh, well, the US doesn't need China, or China doesn't need the United States. I don't think that was ever the point. I don't think the point of any of this is for there to be no trade at all between China and the United States. I think that the United States did a really stupid thing and basically outsourced absolutely everything to China, and then is trying to weirdly backtrack and say,
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
wait, no, maybe we shouldn't do this. Well, they should have said that 20 years ago, not right now, but they're, I guess, trying to do that right now. But that's not the point. The point isn't to just like cut everything off. I know that was a talking point for a while where they were the decoupling from China. That's stupid. That's stupid for both sides. Understand that the United States isn't that great at keeping its word, which is a terrible thing. And China just has to understand that, but it's never about it's never been about like completely like cutting China and the United States off from each other. That doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
I want to put
Well,
that.
there is one more aspect that we shouldn't forget, is that China worked hard also at developing itself.
Sure.
Yeah, they did worked out certain aspects of the opportunities that were presented, but again, they were determined to move up the ladder on the merit of their efforts. So that I can tell you, as one who's been observing at least from the early 90s, where I start to really focus on that, is also the self-determination that they had strategies in place. They operate based on a strategy, not just whatever the wind is blowing, because they don't worry about the next 3 years, the next election cycle, the next this, next that. They think in terms about the next 20 years, 25, 30, 40. And that's what helps them also have that determination to reach the goals they did. And we will be detailing more when we talk even further about this, the next sessions, when we do that tomorrow. So.
Okay, tomorrow, guys.
Yeah. So I'll be, we'll see you tomorrow, guys. I'll be flying back. Again, hopefully there will be no delay, whatever, but we'll set it up. No worries. Doesn't matter whenever I get there. We'll do another live, and we'll do Wednesday and Thursday. So we'll do the topic you mentioned about earlier, Elizabeth, and we'll do the other one regarding the what was the second one?
Was it the China builds first giant supercomputer network?
Yes, that one also.
I cannot wait to do that.
That one. Hopefully, by the time I get back home, I'll do some research on it, and we go from there. All right, guys. Well, we want to thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. Remember to hit the like button, and don't forget, please, to share this video with others. It goes without saying. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. We would greatly appreciate your support. And as always, we will see you next time soon. So, all right, guys, you take care. Till next time. Bye.